the first thing I need to do is just give a quick disclosure to note that I'm not speaking here today on behalf of any company that I currently work for or have worked for in the past. I'm here today speaking to you on behalf of my own leadership journey and experience. Next slide. What I thought we would go through is an introduction as to who I am, the impact of leadership, how to establish followership, what are some leadership behaviors and outcomes to help establish that leadership, that followership, and then key takeaways. After that, we can open it up for Q&A. Thank you. Next slide. So just by way of background, as mentioned, my name is Beth Davis. I currently work for a company called Cepheid, which is a global molecular diagnostics company. I serve as the Director of Market Access for the US. And basically, I'm focused right now on establishing market access coverage and reimbursement for our molecular diagnostic assays. I have over 30 years experience spanning clinical laboratory, molecular diagnostics, pharmaceutical, and medical device companies. Some of the companies that I've worked for are large companies, Roche Biomedical Laboratories, which eventually became LabCorp, a company called Cytech, which is now known as Hologic, Publicis Managed Markets, some startup companies, Agendia and MDX Health. These are just a few. And essentially, throughout my experience, I primarily focused on building and leading market access strategy and reimbursement teams, launching of new molecular diagnostics in infectious diseases and oncology diagnostics, assessing market access and strategy, and then establishing coverage, coding, and reimbursement for on-market diagnostics. When I am not busy working, I do live in Florida. I recently moved from Miami to Wellington, where my daughter is an avid show jumping equestrian. So we constantly are at horse shows in our spare time. We're pretty active animal advocates as well, and just enjoy, just lovely Florida, especially now in our winter. Next slide. So I want to talk to you today about the impact of leadership. And my awareness to leadership is that people tend to follow strong leaderships, and I'm just as guilty of that. They're most likely to be inspired and sustain long-term success, whereas poor leadership often results in short-term wins, but a lack of loyalty to either a department or internal to a company as well. Next slide. So leadership has truly impacted my career, and I'm grateful for every step of the way. As a 21-year-old graduate from college, I was a little bit of a late bloomer and wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do. Eventually, I had my heart set on becoming a pharmaceutical sales representative. I really wanted to make an impact in the world. I wasn't able to cure diseases, but if I can open up access to help people access care and treatments that they need, then I could make an impact. Handed out resumes and wound up having my first job in a large medical laboratory as a field customer service representative. So close, wasn't really that pharmaceutical sales rep that I wanted to be, but at least I started to get my feet wet. With that experience came my first entree into leadership, and I didn't even recognize it right off the bat. I was hired by a woman named Donna, absolutely loved her. She took a personal interest in me, and it made me love my job. The challenge that I had at the time was that it wasn't pharmaceutical sales rep, and I really wanted to become a pharmaceutical sales rep. So I left the job as a field customer service rep after about a year and went on to pharmaceutical sales. Well, there is where I realized, without knowing, that Donna was practicing servant leadership. I had a leader, very nice. She was more like a boss, though, as opposed to a leader, very cordial, but didn't necessarily take an interest in me. She just wanted to know how many calls I made per day and how much I sold per day, even though I was hitting my numbers, no interest beyond that. And it wasn't an environment where I felt that I could make a great impact. Eventually, I got a call back from my original boss, Donna, and there was an opportunity for me to become a laboratory sales rep, which I jumped on. A couple of weeks after I took the position and I was doing great, the laboratory was acquired by another lab, which eventually became LabCorp. And the LabCorp sales rep had about 20 more years experience than I did. They moved my manager, Donna, into this department called managed care. And I didn't understand what managed care was. I was strictly sales. And I remember saying to her, Donna, whatever it is you're doing, I want to do. And that is because of her strong leadership that I didn't recognize at the time was servant leadership. So into the managed care department I went, and I learned the terminology, I learned the job, and I was guided, and I was able to collaborate with Donna all the way. So that started to really shape my career. And after 30 years, I am still in what's transitioned names, managed care, market access, going up through various leadership roles. The slides aren't showing, so I'm not sure if you can still hear me. Did we lose connection?
We can hear you.
We
Okay,
can hear, yeah, but I don't know if we are in the other sections. I don't know. No, yep.
There you go, they're back.
Okay, great, perfect. So from there, I went on to become a managed care executive. And I just wanted to share the potential outcomes of ineffective leadership. And this is what I saw through my own experience at a variety of different companies, as well as the outcomes of effective leadership. So potential outcomes with ineffective leadership, employee retention can be very low, which results in high turnover dollars. So the company spends a lot to onboard an employee and then to replace an employee. And there is a significant monetary value to that. It inhibits strategic thinking and collaboration, which ultimately can affect the company's bottom line, their growth and financial performance. It also may result in a toxic work environment if you've ever seen a mass exodus from a company due to ineffective leadership. And we'll talk about the behaviors that drive ineffective leadership in a moment. Next slide. So the likely impact of effective leadership is employee retention is high with low turnover. There's a favorable organization reputation that can occur. People want to come work for good companies with good leadership. You can have a great product and poor leadership, and you wind up having an unfavorable organization reputation and higher turnover. So there's an expense associated with that. When you have effective leadership, motivated employees that are really driven for success, want to do more and want to do better. They enjoy what they do, and they tend to give more of themselves, and through collaboration, tend to achieve more as a team, which results, again, in increased productivity and ultimately an increased bottom line. Next slide. So I look at leadership as it's really not just a position or a title, but really it is a privilege. And the way I look at developing followership is actually through something called servant leadership, which was a term coined by Robert Greenleaf. And if you haven't read any of his articles, I would recommend Googling and pulling down some of his articles. But really his philosophy is where the primary goal of the leader is to serve others. And there's a strategy around serving others. You ultimately prioritize the growth and well-being of your team and the constant development of your team. If you can grow your team and elevate your team's success by serving that team, again, you lead to more effective collaboration, more strategic thinking, more commitment, dedication, that lower turnover rate, and ultimately a better bottom line with happier employees that don't look at their work as just a job. They look at it as a career. Next slide. So examples, and these are just a few examples of leadership behaviors in effective leadership. It's really a leader who operates with integrity and transparency. You need to instill trust within your team and across colleagues throughout the organization. And you really do that by being transparent and honest. Not everything's always going to go well, but what I see and what I've experienced is when there is transparency into what is being done and what needs to be done, or what headwinds and tailwinds may be present, it really opens up that opportunity for collaboration, for agility, and a safe space to be able to maneuver to achieve goals. Communicativeness. Clearly communicating with the team members and soliciting their input and feedback on a regular basis, not just at an annual review or when it's too late, but that constant two-way gets additional skin in the game, makes people feel valued, and creates that safe space for open and candid discussions. Why is something working? What ideas do you have? And never making the employee feel less than valued for maybe not such a great idea, but more so of, let's understand this idea and let's figure out what's going to work best and timeline for that. And that starts to inspire others as well. It instills a culture of ongoing learning, coaching, and mentoring, and the opportunity to really provide constructive feedback. Healthy debates are critical, and understanding why something will work, why something will be implemented, or why something should not be implemented really provides that value and makes that person feel more engaged and more important. Additionally, taking the time to thank and recognize others for their contributions, whether big or small, is so critical. Just the fact that they take that time, that employees, again, feel valued. Listening is another leadership behavior, just that effective listening to hear what is your employee saying. And if you start to ask those thoughtful questions, which we'll get into in a moment, you can solicit that feedback and get the understanding of what's important to each individual on your team so that you can play to their strengths and further sharpen weaknesses. Ineffective leadership typically employs a sense of fear. It's lead by rule and demand. It can drive some successes, though I typically see them as very short-term successes with no sense of loyalty to a company or to an issue at hand. It's very directive. Employees really aren't asked for their feedback, and their feedback isn't solicited. In some cases, it could be very condescending, and if someone speaks to an idea or a thought that is not effective, it can be very, very humiliating. There's no transparency into change, and change sometimes can be difficult or hard for employees to go through, but when you're transparent, that makes that change a little easier for them to swallow, gives them an understanding as to why a direction may have changed, why the company is going in a different direction. and it allows that employee to come along for that ride. When you don't solicit input from the team, you don't get that skin in the game, and your employees tend to feel undervalued or disvalued, and they do the least amount possible to sustain. Often hire less experienced people. What I've noticed with effective leadership, and even for me, I've always liked to hire people that were smarter than me, because it just builds up the strength and abilities of the team. I like different backgrounds. I like different skill sets, so that coming all together, it just creates more brain power, more effectiveness within a team. And as opposed to an ineffective leader hiring less experienced people because they may either be intimidated, they may not themselves have the level of experience necessary, nor do they bother to mentor or coach their employees. And employees, when you look at what's important, yes, there's a performance growth factor, but there's also a developmental growth factor. And it's important to really recognize both. Maybe somebody wants to improve on a skill and go in a specific direction versus another employee who wants a totally opposite direction. And it's very individual to those employees. And there's ways to really coach and mentor to what employees would like to do. And again, that's playing to their strengths and further sharpening and elevating weaknesses to strengthen those weaknesses. Next slide. So developing followership through prioritizing and continual team development. It's really important, and I think this read through on the previous slide, is really seek to understand. And the way to seek to understand is through thoughtful questions. And that fingerprint there is supposed to represent that all employees are different. Everyone has individual interests, even if they're participating and they're working on the same team. Some questions around what skill sets would you like to strengthen? What areas and direction would you like to go in? And then understanding, why is that important to them? What have they been wrestling with? And this question to me is so important. And in a safe space, your employees will speak to say, these are my gaps. This is what I'm having a challenge with. And it's not necessary to look at that question as a negative, but look at it as a positive, and then start to, again, probe a little bit further to understand, what are they wrestling with? What do they think would make a difference, as opposed to coming in with just a straight solution. It allows them to, again, sharpen those problem-solving skills, those strategic skills, and the ability to just communicate, which is so important to the success of the overall team. And I think when we look at goals from an overall perspective, it drives an opportunity to accelerate goal attainment and minimize risks associated with lack of goal attainment or delays to goals because someone isn't speaking up and or afraid to admit that, okay, this is not working out as we expected, and that they're lost because they're afraid of failure or afraid of red. Understanding, what does success look like for a specific individual? Are there specific projects that they would like to take a lead on? And again, this leads more to developmental goals that a person may have. Maybe they want to develop their ability to facilitate meetings. Maybe they want to go in a lateral direction and expand their strengths and capabilities. So these are the types of questions that get to the crux of what's important to a specific employee, both from a performance goal as well as from developmental goals. And then just in general, what are your thoughts about X? If you're working on a specific project, what are their thoughts? Get their feedback. They could have great ideas, And sometimes you just build off one another. So don't be afraid to ask those thoughtful questions. In fact, I would ask them usually on a quarterly basis as opposed to waiting for an end of the year for a review period to come. Because things change and dynamics change throughout the year. Next slide. Elevate individual and team successes. And it's important, again, all employees would love to feel valued. So highlight the value and success. And there's multiple different ways. Of course, what always resonates well with employees is, the monetary awards, but also non-monetary awards do resonate and do make a big impact. And they can be as simple as a thank you note or broad company acknowledgement, including company leadership, executive committees, and so forth. But employees in general should be recognized for their contributions, no matter how big or how small. Next slide. You can also expand that followership beyond your direct reports and extending it to peers, colleagues, and even external customers through collaborating with others, sharing best practices, asking about what works for them. Again, seeking to understand situations, dynamics, opportunities, interests really elevates, I think, the performance of the organization overall and the individuals leading various projects or teams or work. Always lead by example and being your authentic self. People can be a very good read and know when it's just touting a company line or just not necessarily coming across as sincere or authentic. And again, making others feel valued, whether they report to you or not. That's a way to expand that followership just beyond your direct reports, but throughout the organization. So always lead by example. Next slide. So key takeaways really are exercising servant leadership behaviors and competencies. You can have the ability to guide and inspire others to achieve goals. And as I started with the story of my manager, Donna, who at the time, unbeknownst to me, was practicing servant leadership, it really shaped my career. And it inspired me. I wanted to be her. I wanted to lead like her. I wanted to learn from her. And I did. She welcomed me. She welcomed my input. She solicited my input and feedback. Never made me feel like any of my ideas were subpar, and some were. When I look back, I was just, oh my God, I can't believe I even suggested that. And other ideas were actually really good that she let me run with and let me lead with, because she started to understand what was important to me, which made me feel valued. And then because of that, I wanted to do better and better and more and more. Next slide. And I think that brings us to the conclusion. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today, and we can open it up to the Q&A.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And yes, we've had a few questions that have come in. So I'm going to begin with our first question. And our first question is it possible to practice servant leadership in a computer-mediated environment, like a virtual team?
I absolutely think so. I think it's a great question, and it's just really it's really soliciting that input and feedback, whether you do it face to face or whether you're doing it in a virtual environment. There's always ways to collaborate. You can collaborate through Teams, through Zoom, through email, through different ways, through Miro boards. So there's different opportunities to engage with others and demonstrate that leadership, that thought-provoking, provocative questioning of others, getting that feedback, and working as a team to map out what works, what doesn't work. I think it's just a matter of being a little bit creative. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, great answer. Thank you so much. All right, I think we have time for maybe two more questions. And here's one. How can I, as a female leader, ensure that I am striking the right balance between being assertive and showing vulnerability?
It's such a great point. So it goes back to being your authentic self with showing vulnerability, and being very transparent. Where again, just as you would solicit feedback and provide thoughtful questions to others, it's okay to share, hey, this is where I'm stuck. I would welcome your feedback. And it's all about that collaboration and that constant communication, thoughtful questioning, and just being appreciative of the feedback you get, whether you choose to use it or not, as opposed to not soliciting feedback and thinking you have all the answers. And that shows that vulnerability when you state, here's where I'm struggling. So it's always lead by that example.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question before we move to our panel discussion for today. And a question from Felicia is, what is the best lesson you learned from a bad leader?
So there's actually two lessons that I've learned, and it depends on the bad leader. So the bad leader that I shared with you from my experience at the pharmaceutical company wasn't that this person wasn't nice. They just were more like a boss versus a leader. I never got the feeling that I was valued despite hitting numbers. There was no opportunity for collaboration, no opportunity for change. Never once did they ever even say, hey, is there anything you need? They just left me on my own and made me feel just that I was, a hot commodity for the moment because I was making my number. The second lesson that I learned from a bad leader is a bad leader, one who doesn't listen, but one who creates humility, and one who, puts others down, starts to create a very toxic environment that creates a mass exodus and ultimately hits the company's bottom line in a negative aspect. So those are the two big takeaways that I learned through my own experiences.
Well, thank you so much. Well, as we move to our first panel discussion of the afternoon, do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you can share with our audience today?
I would just say embrace the key learnings of others, embrace practicing asking those, sometimes difficult questions, but thoughtful questions, and figure out what works specifically for you. And that's what's going to help make you an authentic leader.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your wonderful thoughts today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.